let me make sure that you understand I'm not here representing the NRA. I'm not even a member. Okay? I didn't grow up in a house with guns. I don't hunt. I personally abhor hunting. But I was given a gun by a friend when I was 21 to carry in my purse for self-defense, and I was taught how to use it. A couple of years ago, my parents and I went to a cafeteria in Texas on a bright sunny day. We weren't in a dark alley where we weren't supposed to be. And as you all know the story, this madman drove his truck through the window. And he began shooting. Well, immediately, my father and I got down on the floor and put the table up in front of us. And this guy kept shooting. And you're thinking, what could it be? Is it a robbery? That's the first thing that generally comes to mind. And he keeps shooting. It took me a good 45 seconds to realize that this man wasn't there to commit a robbery. He wasn't there for a hit. He was there to simply shoot as many people as he possibly could. Now, I'd like to make something clear. I hear all this talk about how many bullets can go in a clip. I've been there. I can tell you it doesn't matter. It takes 1 second to switch out a clip. You can have 1 bullet or 100 bullets. It doesn't matter, guys. I've been there. He goes, dump, dump, just like that. That's not enough time to rush a man. I promise you. When I finally realized what was occurring, I thought, I got him. And I reached for my purse. He was maybe 12 feet away. Is it possible my gun could have jammed? Sure. Is it possible I could have missed? Sure. But I can tell you I've hit much smaller targets at much greater distances. But then I realized that a couple of months earlier I had made the stupidest decision of my life. I took my gun out of my purse and left it in my car. Because as you well know, in the state of Texas, it's sometimes a felony offense to carry a gun in your purse. I can tell you that I'm not mad at the guy that did this. As he continued, it was obvious that he was a madman. My father, at that point, said, I've got to do something. I've got to do something. He's going to kill everybody in here. And he rushed the man. No way. This guy turned, shot him in the chest. He went down, was obviously mortally wounded. For whatever reason, that made the man change directions and go off to my left. Shortly thereafter, someone at the back of the restaurant broke out a window. When I saw what looked like an opportunity to escape, I turned around and I grabbed my mother by the shirt and I said, come on, we've got to run, we've got to get out of here. And then my feet grew wings and I was out the back window. As soon as I got out, I realized that my mother had not followed me out. And as I learned from the police officers, she had crawled over to where my father was and cradled him until the guy got back around to her, put the gun to her head. She looked up at him, put her head down, and he pulled the trigger. My parents had just had their 47th wedding anniversary. She wasn't going anywhere. As I mentioned, I'm not really mad at the guy that did this. And I'm certainly not mad at the guns that did this. They didn't walk in there by themselves and pull their own triggers. The guy that did it was a lunatic. That's like being mad at a rabid dog. I'm mad at my legislators for legislating me out of the right to protect myself and my family. I would much rather be sitting in jail with a felony offense on my head and have my parents alive. As far as these so-called assault weapons, you say that they don't have any defense use. You tell that to the guy that I saw on a videotape of the LA riots, standing up on his rooftop, protecting his property and his life from an entire mob with one of these so-called assault weapons. Tell me that he didn't have a legitimate self-defense use. Just one final statement. I've been sitting here getting more and more fed up with all of this talk about these pieces of machinery having no legitimate sporting purpose, no legitimate hunting purpose. People, that is not the point of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is not about duck hunting. And I know I'm not going to make very many friends saying this, but it's about our right, all of our right, to to be able to protect ourselves from all of you guys up there.
After the verdict, we began receiving phone calls from the Korean merchants who were stuck in South Central Los Angeles. They said they called 911, but the police was not coming.
When I got home that evening, my wife was pacing in front of the TV, and she had the Korean radio on full blast as well. On the TV, you could actually see burning Los Angeles and the looting, but on the Korean radio, you could actually hear merchants who were still stuck there and frantically calling the radio station saying that the police department and the fire department were not responding to their calls. So I immediately got on the phone and started calling the network television stations to apprise them of the situation. Of course, they were not interested and nothing came of it.
There were so many calls coming in. We had to go on emergency broadcast. We connected the callers directly to the radio. The radio was being broadcast live by the callers.
제가 아는 흑인 친구가 얘기하듯이 얘기를 들었습니다. 제가 두 방화범들이 서로 누가 백군데 불을 먼저 많이 지르나 그거를 내기를 했답니다. 그래갖고 이 친구들이 그거를 시합을 해갖고 이게 보통 이게 방화범 아니면 그렇게 불을 지를 수가 없습니다.
We stayed up that night until 2 in the morning, until the looting died down. We concluded that that was part of the cost of doing business in South Central, which obviously was a rough neighborhood.
They were coming right up to Koreatown, as you well know.
Next day on the way to work, I was still listening to the radio, and a caller called in and said that his African-American friends were telling him that the African-American gangs that were burning and looting the night before were sending out leaflets saying that Koreatown was next. When I got into the office that morning, I looked out the window and I could actually see columns of smoke coming up Vermont Avenue. Pickup trucks full of African-American youth, obviously gang members, with guns, and were shooting, and they were driving through Wilshire Boulevard. You couldn't see any police cars.
Next morning, we were receiving calls that Koreatown was the next target. We then received calls from the LAPD. They told us to announce to the Korean business to close early and leave. We began broadcasting everyone to close the businesses and leave town.
Richard Choi on the radio urging Korean American business people to close their businesses and evacuate Koreatown. So I drove to Radio Korea and told Mr. Choi that we must tell the people to stay and defend the town.
Around noon, David Kim, our attorney, came to the station.
I told him that on the way to the radio station, I saw these Latinos standing in front of their houses and apartments waiting for the town to empty out. It was obvious that there were no police cars around and that the LAPD was not going to defend the town. And I told them that if we evacuated, then we would be leaving the town to the looters who would burn just like they did South Central the day before. Of course, when I was telling him this, I knew that in Korea, the Korean immigrants had served, I think, something like 3 years in the military because it was mandatory. And they all knew how to use the weapons. They were trained.
I asked him if that was legal. He told me,
under the U.S. Constitution, you have the right to bear arms. And that in a situation like this, of course we can defend our property.
We changed our broadcast from leaving our town to defending our town.
This was based on the assumption that the National Guard would arrive and would eventually give us support. Even though we heard that the National Guard did come, we couldn't see them in Koreatown. And we were left to defend ourselves.
Two Korean businessmen doing for themselves what neither police nor National Guard are on hand to do.
There was a man out here who says we're all trained to shoot. Why? What's the feeling?
Well, see, we have no hatred towards black people. We have nothing against anybody. All we wanted to do is work hard and make it like the rest of us, and we know. But people are driving by, shooting at us, and we have to do something about it. We have no police support whatsoever. National Guard, I've heard about it from early this morning. We don't see any of that support coming out. We have a lot of shotguns in here and some handguns, but we have to use them because we have to defend our lives. We have to defend our property. People out there watching, please just don't sit there and enjoy this great exhibition.
This is not entertainment, it's not a Hollywood action shot.
No,
this is the actual life that we're talking. We got shot in what? Car windows, fly-by bullets come out. They're shooting at us. We may be shooting at up there, but they're shooting at us. So far, we've been shooting up, but when it comes to worse, we're not gonna sit around shooting upside. We're gonna shoot at them. That's how close we got to right now.
Those of us who were on the commission were called to a meeting at the Transamerica building, which was Transamerica building then. We were on the roof of the building, and the police were trying to tell us that things were under control. And they told us that the real critical point at that moment were those streets approaching Koreatown. I mean, it wasn't very reassuring. I think it's the first thing to say, seeing the fires going up, even as they were telling us that things were under control. And we all looked towards Koreatown, and there was nothing there. And so the police were not there. And then they offered to give some of us a drive through the area so we could see what some of the issues were. And I chose to go to Koreatown in my drive-through. And the police were probably going 60 miles an hour down the street. I mean, they weren't stopping for lights or anything. They were just speeding through because they were afraid. And what we saw were Koreans in front of their businesses, protecting their businesses. That's what we saw. And you were right. That area was targeted, and people were on their way. And if the Koreans had not themselves defended the area, it would have burned.
That night, Koreatown turned into a war zone. There were gun battles waging between the African-American gangs who came in groups with weapons, and Korean-American merchants defended the businesses. Radio Korea became the command post for these people, and people would call in to say where they're being attacked, and other volunteers in other areas would actually converge there to try to help them. One ironic thing was that the policemen who were saying that they were too busy to stop the looting were actually arresting the Korean volunteers for possession of arms without permits. We couldn't tell if they were trying to protect the gangs or they're trying to protect the Korean merchants. The LAPD were telling the volunteers that they could not defend businesses or stores or areas where the actual owners were not present. Well, they're the ones who told these people to lock up and leave. And when the volunteers were trying to put out a fire on 6th and Western, for example, they arrested them, and they confiscated their weapons and told them to leave. It was a small fire that could have been put out by these volunteers. That building burned to the ground.
Because of the downpouring of the ashes, and it was difficult to breathe and walk around in the town, we were heading towards the suburbs. And as we were driving out, to my surprise, the National Guard trucks were visible on the road, on the highways, and instead of heading towards Koreatown, they were heading into the suburbs. And to me, that was just unimaginable that these troops were present, and but obviously told not to protect the area of the most danger, but to protect the suburbs.